As the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of another overnight shift at the gas station, I settled into my routine. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead provided a constant buzz, punctuated only by the occasional beep of the cash register or the distant rumble of passing cars. The rain had started earlier in the evening, a steady downpour that cast a veil of mist over the deserted streets. It was the kind of night that made even the most mundane tasks feel ominous, each shadow concealing untold secrets beneath its murky depths. But despite the dreary weather, I found solace in the familiarity of my surroundings. The gas station had become my second home over the past year, a sanctuary of sorts, where I could while away the hours lost in thought or conversation with the occasional late-night customer. As the minutes stretched into hours, the flow of customers dwindled to a trickle, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows. I passed the time by rearranging the shelves, straightening rows of snacks and drinks with practiced efficiency. But amidst the monotony, a sense of unease began to creep into the corners of my mind. It started as a nagging feeling, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that refused to be ignored. I brushed it off as nothing more than the product of an overactive imagination, a side effect of the late hour and the eerie quiet of the night. But then, as if on cue, the headlights pierced through the darkness, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. I glanced up from my task, expecting to see the familiar sight of a car pulling up to the pumps. Instead, I found myself face to face with a lone figure standing just beyond the reach of the flickering streetlights. For a moment, we stood locked in a silent standoff, his gaze piercing through the glass with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled over me like a suffocating blanket, chalking it up to paranoia born of solitude. But as the minutes stretched into eternity, and still he remained unmoving, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. With a sense of foreboding, I turned my attention back to the shelves, trying to distract myself from the unsettling presence outside. But no amount of busy work could dispel the creeping sense of unease that had taken root in my mind. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the night with the same silent stealth that had heralded his arrival. I breathed a sigh of relief, telling myself it was nothing more than a trick of the imagination, a fleeting encounter with a stranger in the night. But as the hours wore on, and still no other customers came, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. It was as if the night itself held its breath, waiting with bated breath for something to happen. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, it did. I heard it before I saw it. A faint shuffling sound echoing through the empty parking lot. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to make out the source of the noise. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving with purpose along the side of the building. With a sinking feeling, I realized that I was not alone. I crept towards the back door, my pulse racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to escape the looming threat that lurked just beyond the threshold. But something held me in place, rooted to the spot by a morbid curiosity that refused to be ignored. I pressed my ear against the heavy metal door, listening intently as the footsteps drew closer and closer. Each step was like a hammer blow, echoing through the empty store with bone-chilling clarity. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable sound of the door handle turning, the harsh creak of metal as it swung open to reveal the darkness beyond. But it never came. Instead, there was only silence, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the roof. And then, just when I thought it was safe to breathe again, I heard it. A low, guttural growl emanating from just beyond the door. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I realized the truth. I was not alone in the darkness. With trembling hands, I reached for the phone, my fingers fumbling for the familiar shape of the receiver. But before I could dial for help, a voice shattered the silence, sending a chill down my spine. "Hello, my friend," it whispered, its words dripping with malice. "It seems we have some unfinished business." And with that, the door swung open, revealing the figure standing on the other side. A figure bathed in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows that danced across its face. And as it stepped into the light, I realized with a sinking feeling that the nightmare was only just beginning. It was a night at the office. The hum of the air conditioning, the soft glow of the computer screens, and the occasional tap of keyboards echoed through the building. Working late wasn't uncommon, especially when deadlines loomed overhead like dark clouds waiting to burst. And for me, catching up on work meant sacrificing sleep, especially after already using up sick days earlier in the week. As the night wore on, the office emptied, leaving me alone in the vast space. But I was determined to make progress on my project. I settled in at my desk, surrounded by rows of empty chairs and deserted workstations. The only company I had was the soft glow of my laptop screen, illuminating the otherwise dim room. However, as the hours ticked by, fatigue began to weigh heavily on my eyelids. Despite my best efforts to push through, exhaustion crept in, threatening to pull me into its grasp. With a sigh, I reluctantly admitted defeat and decided to make a coffee run to rejuvenate myself. In the break room, I went through the motions of brewing a cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine would jolt me awake. But just as the warm liquid began to pour into my mug, a sudden thud reverberated through the building, shattering the silence of the night. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in place, listening intently for any sign of what had caused the disturbance. After a moment of hesitation, I debated whether to investigate the source of the noise. Fatigue clouded my judgment, convincing me that it was probably just an innocuous occurrence. A book falling off a shelf or a door slamming shut in the wind. With a shrug, I dismissed the sound and returned to my desk, determined to finish my work. Despite my efforts to stay focused, The drowsiness persisted, weighing down on me like a heavy blanket. I soldiered on, typing away at my keyboard in a futile attempt to push through the exhaustion. But eventually, sleep won the battle, and I drifted off at my desk, succumbing to its relentless pull. When I woke up, disoriented and groggy, the faint sound of a beeping noise caught my attention. Confusion clouded my mind as I struggled to identify its source. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was nearing 2 a.m., and with a sense of resignation, I decided to call it a night. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, the beeping grew louder, gnawing at my nerves with each incessant sound. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I followed the noise, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. It was then that I noticed something amiss. A metal rod lying on the ground near the entrance, the door left ajar. Panic surged through me as I realized the implications. Someone had broken into the building, and I had been oblivious to their presence. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I bolted towards the nearest exit, desperate to escape the looming threat. Once outside, I fumbled for my phone, dialing emergency services as quickly as my trembling fingers would allow. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for help to arrive, each passing moment filled with dread and uncertainty. When the police finally arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the premises, but the intruder was long gone, leaving behind nothing but lingering fear and unanswered questions. It wasn't until the security footage was reviewed that the full extent of the intrusion was revealed. A masked figure, shrouded in darkness, had entered the building under the cover of night, their intentions unknown. They had prowled the halls with silent intent, their presence unnoticed until it was too late. The realization sent a chill down my spine, casting a shadow of doubt over the once familiar surroundings of the office. From that day forward, the thought of staying late alone filled me with a sense of unease, a reminder of the night when danger lurked just beyond the glow of the computer screen. For years, Jake had roamed the dimly lit aisles of the fast food restaurant as its silent guardian, the janitor of the night. His world consisted of scrubbing grease off grills and mopping floors while the world outside slept. It was a routine he'd grown accustomed to, until one fateful night shattered his sense of security. As usual, Jake arrived for his shift, slipping into his headphones to drown out the quiet hum of the empty restaurant. But that night, silence wasn't his only companion. The rhythmic knocking at the door sent shivers down his spine, echoing through the empty dining area like a ghostly call. Curiosity pulling him forward, Jake approached the door, only to find darkness staring back at him. Brushing it off as a trick of the night, he returned to his duties, trying to shake the unease that settled in his bones. Hours passed, and the restaurant remained a sanctuary of solitude until the knock returned, louder and more insistent. This time, Jake couldn't ignore it. With cautious steps, he approached the source, his heart pounding in his chest. What he saw through the drive-through window would haunt him forever. A man, his features obscured by shadows, his gaze empty yet piercing. Frozen in terror, Jake watched as the stranger disappeared into the night, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. Haunted by the encounter, Jake's nerves were on edge as he continued his tasks. Every creak and rustle sending him into a frenzy of paranoia. But it wasn't until he ventured outside to empty the garbage that the nightmare truly began. In the darkness, the man emerged once more, his presence suffocating as he closed in on Jake with silent determination. Panic seized Jake's chest as he fumbled for safety, the man's outstretched arm a barrier between him and escape. Driven by primal instinct, Jake fled, his heart racing as he raced towards the safety of the front door. With trembling hands, he unlocked the entrance, the sound of his pursuer's footsteps hot on his heels. Escape was a fleeting victory as Jake stumbled into the night, his breath ragged as he dialed for help, the echo of his own fear drowning out the world around him. When the authorities arrived, the man had vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions and the lingering fear of the unknown. And though Jake returned to his duties, the shadows of that night would forever cast a pall over his once mundane existence, a reminder that even in the quietest of places, darkness lurks just beyond the light.